All right. All right, guys. Good morning and welcome to the Employability Skill Series, where we explore the top skills employers are looking for in candidates. Each week, we will cover a different topic with thoughts and insights from professionals in a variety of industries. I am your host, Megan Morrow, Senior Associate Director of Experiential Learning and Employer Relations. And today I have Josh Wright, Managing Partner of Master Plan Group Advisors, as my guest, and we will be discussing the importance of professional branding in the workplace. Josh's passion is to help individuals and organizations lead, sell, serve, and live well, refining their master plan. As a former major college athlete and coach, a leadership development trainer, and practicing attorney and CEO, Josh understands firsthand the unique challenges and struggles that professionals and executives face in both business development and leadership. Josh spent 14 years as CEO of Master Plan Group International and sports management and representation firm. As CEO, Josh led the growth of the firm from startup phase to an established company that was ranked in the top 1% of firms in NFL representation. He also worked as chairman of the board on other startups where he focused on building relationship teams. Josh has had opportunity to train and coach partners at some of the top law firms in the U.S. and is now able to leverage that experience along his broader strategic leadership and sales experience to help clients maximize their master plan. Today, as chairman of the Master Plan Group, Josh oversees both Master Plan's advisory group as well as the long-standing sports division. Before creating Master Plan Group, Josh practiced as a corporate and tax attorney for closely held companies, their executives. Josh completed his JD at DePaul University and worked on his master's in bioethics, at Trinity International University and has a Bachelor of Science from West Virginia University, where he double majored in biochemistry and exercise physiology. Quite an impressive bio there. So good morning, Josh. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I do need to share our screen here so that our students can capture that QR code to get your attendance. But thank you so much for being here with us today, Josh. So welcome.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. I think this is a great program. I've had an opportunity to do this at a couple other schools after you and I first had this conversation because I had actually shared with a couple of my clients that I was doing this for you last year, and they're like, "Oh, my university does the same thing, and I'm an adjunct there, and I'd love to get you in to speak." So this has actually kind of generated some additional opportunities, and I think it's an exciting time to be having a course like this because for you all who are now in dead week, and I'm under the assumption that many of you are seniors. Is that correct, Megan?
Yep, we have a wide range of majors and levels here, anywhere from freshmen to seniors, but I would say the majority are probably juniors and seniors. Yeah.
Right. So you're in that process now of either looking for those big summer internships, well, actually those are probably already set, but beginning to or on the front end of kind of starting that whole interview process. And it's interesting in the job market right now because I talk to a lot of senior executives on a weekly basis, and one of their big concerns is the ability to differentiate all the people out there. Um, and it's a challenge, and I think one of the fascinating things that AI has brought to bear, while it's created some ease in some of the basic tasks, it's also homogenized us a bit. And one of the things that we're seeing when people are looking in the hiring process now is they're seeing resumes that are very homogenous, that look very much alike. And quite frankly, it's because everybody's using Claude or ChatGPT or Grok or whatever your preferred AI is. And it's churning out what may sound like professional language, but it also sounds kind of like when everybody's special, nobody is, in the sense that there's no unique story in there anymore. So I would challenge you as we go through this time today to take some notes, think about some of the things I'm saying, and actually, Megan, I don't know if they're able to ask questions or if you can, if they do ask a question that I can't see, that
Mhm.
you can kind of communicate to me and interrupt me. It's fine.
Sure.
So we can dive into those because I think it's critically important that you differentiate yourself. You cannot be one of the thousands of resumes that come across your desk that doesn't stand apart. Again, great resumes, but if there's no story attached to bring that resume to life, um, you're kind of in a pool of homogenization that makes it really difficult for employers to even want to take a look at your resume.
I
So
like that.
this some food for thought. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation yesterday with a couple of executives on a company that I sit on the board of, and they are sitting in the NIL marketplace, and we were talking about branding. And I don't know how many of you have followed the Tennessee quarterback over the last couple of weeks, but he was holding out for more money. He didn't show up at practice. He wasn't going to come to the spring game, and so Tennessee cut him loose.
Ooh.
And basically their take was, and again, they got out in front of the story and they controlled the narrative and he did not control the narrative in his camp. And so what happened was he came off as greedy, as not living up to expectations, as not showing up for the branding opportunities that his previous year's NIL had required of him, even to the point of them saying that maybe he threw the college football playoff game last year. And what's interesting is that those story narratives were controlled by people coming out of the University of Tennessee versus Nico and his camp didn't respond until it was entirely too late. And so one of the things I raised that because we all have an NIL, we all have name, image, and likeness. Because of social media, unless you are completely blacked out of social media, we all have a name, image, and likeness out there that employers look for now. And that name, image, and likeness carries forward. We may not be getting paid for it today, but it carries forward over the course of your professional career. And I share that Nico story because that's going to be something he has to. I represented guys in the NFL for 25 years, and I can absolutely tell you that when he goes to the combine here in another year, the first question they bring up will be the whole scenario with him leaving Tennessee and the circumstances with which he left Tennessee, and if they can trust him to lead their team as a result of that. And so I share that again, not because any of you all are probably preparing to be an NFL quarterback or a Power Four quarterback, but that's part of what executives look for today. They look at your history, they look at your social media. They try to piece together a story that's something other than the Chat GPT email or Chat GPT resume that you probably put together and sent to them to kind of differentiate. And particularly when you get to a second or third round, they're going to dig deep in your social media because they want to know what your true story is, not just what you portray publicly. And so I challenge you on that to go back and look at your social media, all of it, and control your story. And if there's things on there that you're like, I said that back then, I probably wouldn't say that now, you might want to get rid of it. And so I think there is something to be said, particularly in this day and age, to go back and clean up your social media accounts. And don't think any social media is off limits because as we see on a daily basis, people will screenshot and post stuff if they don't like you or if they like you today and don't like you tomorrow. That they will save, they will keep receipts, and they will use down the road. And so I would recommend an abundance of caution going into the current um, marketplace as far as the job market is concerned. So how do I control my story though? How do I get out in front of that? As far that's just kind of the cleanup phase. And that's certainly an important part of it because as people do their diligence on you to differentiate on you, you need to make sure that your story is consistent with who you are. And I think that's the next thing I'd like to emphasize on is really helping you tell your story well. And so this is where your resume can be brought to life. It's going back and looking through all those job descriptions and previous employment and previous educational opportunities and previous extracurricular opportunities and ask yourself, what is the story that I'm pulling out of these? And then look at my resume as a whole and ask myself, what is my story? And when I talk about my story, it's not my title, it's not what I want to do. It's think of it in terms of from now on, when people ask you what you do or ask you what you want to do, don't answer that with a title. I want you to answer that story, that question a little bit differently. And then I want you to answer that question as what problems I solve for whom.
Mhm.
So for me, my generic one, when I don't know who I'm talking to, I'll say something to the effect, I help leaders activate inorganic and organic growth strategies that align with their purpose and their culture and their true story. And that's when I don't know who's in the room. If I'm sitting with this managing partner of a law firm and I know that they're looking at some potential acquisitions, then my story is going to be more refined. It's going to be like, I just helped, I'm in the process of helping a managing partner at an AmLaw 20 law firm think through some acquisition strategies and making sure that that aligns with their current culture and their current long-term goals and the story, quite frankly, they're trying to communicate in the marketplace. And so I refine that same generic story of what problems I solve for whom and make it very specific so that that managing partner of the law firm I'm speaking to sees himself or herself in the story. So if I'm interviewing with someone, I want to use the title of them or someone that they work closely with when I'm referencing what problems I solve for whom. Because then what happens is they see themselves or someone they know in the story benefiting from the problems you solve. And that's where you bring it down to the human level, and that's where you begin to differentiate. When I was
Say that
working
again,
with the
Josh. Say that again. I really like that. They see themselves in that in the story.
yes,
That's really important.
it is. It's a critically important. It moves us from being presenters to actual engaging storytellers. Megan, I have so my kids are big into. We're a nerd family, and so we watch Lord of the Rings, and I read Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings to my kids before they could read. When everybody else was reading Dr. Seuss books, I was reading them
Yeah.
the Two Towers. So which they may have scarred them. I don't know, but one of the things that was fascinating is we'd be watching those movies, and the movies finally came out. So they had read the books, and then they watched the movies, and then um, moved from that to where now then 15 minutes in the movie, all of a sudden my youngest son would disappear. And then all of a sudden you hear this thumping and pounding and booming upstairs. And he was upstairs living out the battle. He had put himself in the story and was battling in that. And that's really what you want a potential employer to do or potential
Mhm.
client to do. You want to draw them into the story so they become a part of it. And so that they feel like, oh, I see myself in your story. I see myself in your story benefiting from what you do. Bringing you on board would benefit me, and that's where you want them to be drawn into the story. And I think it's in our DNA as children, and then quite frankly, our education system um, kind of teaches us to present instead of tell engaging storytelling, instead of telling engaging stories. And I want to challenge you to kind of go back to being a little kid in this regard, at least. Maybe not in some other areas, but in this regard, where we re-engage in story and we re-engage in stories in a way that draws people in so they see themselves in the story, or if not themselves, in someone that they know. Like if I'm interviewing with someone in HR, but the role is for me to work with the controller, I'm going to tell a story, not how I worked with someone in HR. I'm going to tell a story about how I worked with the controller at another company, either as an intern or I work with someone in that role. So the HR person can say, oh, I could see you working with Mary because you've told me a story about how you worked with another controller somewhere else. And so it's a way to kind of again draw people in the story. It makes you memorable. And then the next piece with that story is if that's the story I want to tell them as far as my client engagement is, I've got to then step back and ask myself, does my resume reflect that story consistently? So
Okay.
an example for me, and we lived in downtown Chicago for 28 years, and so had a lot of relationships there, a lot of history there. And one story of alignment that I think kind of reflects that with clarity is um, my kids got involved with a charitable organization called By the Hand Club, which originally was called Kids Club, and it was in our church. And it was basically an intercity mentoring program. It grew to where it had three three charter schools. Yeah, three charter schools, after school program, mentoring all the way through college to help with the transition through with a lot of kids coming out of underserved neighborhoods. My kids became camp counselor or summer counselors and mentors for that. They went through training for that. My wife was on the advisory board for By the Hand Club. And subsequently, as a result, every year I would have three tables at their big charity event, and I'd bring all my clients. And so it was an opportunity for take my story and what we were about as a family and why we stayed in a city to make a difference. And it brought my clients into it. It brought my business partners into it. It brought my spouse into it. It brought my kids into it. And it aligned with where we were wanting to serve charitably. So I kind of created one story and integrated all the areas of my life. So rather than living my life in silos, and if I'm as an executive, I'm looking for someone that feels like they have a life that makes sense. So if I look at your resume and your volunteer organizations seem to have absolutely no correlation to one another, your education seems to be all over the place. There's no real alignment to your story, and there's no clear, cohesive story. It makes me concerned as to whether you've even figured your path out yet. And
Oh.
so even if you haven't figured your path out yet, you need to reflect a story that does. And and as Megan read my background, you would think if you looked at it that it makes no sense. I mean, what I do today probably didn't even exist as a job when I came out of college, as far as consulting for for global professional service firms. But that's where I sit today. And if I look back, the whole story makes sense. But it's because I've worked hard to make sure that that story was aligned around a central theme, a central purpose over the course of time. And so that's really the way I want you to think about this is think in terms of what's my bigger story? What's my story I want to answer to an interviewer? Because when I was practicing law full time and had a lot of corporate clients, represented a number of closely held family businesses, also represented, as Megan acknowledged, a number of professional athletes in motorsports and the NFL, and then had folks that worked for me in other divisions. And consistently, I would be brought in to interview their consultants, whether it was their financial advisors or their accountants or someone that wanted them to invest. And one of the things I always pushed back on was, well, tell me how you've done something like this for someone just like my client. And if all they talked about was their capabilities and the opportunity, I'm like, when they left, I would turn to my client and say, you know what, let someone else be their guinea pig because they clearly have not done this for someone like you. And therefore, there's no reason to take a risk on them. There's a lot of other opportunities out there. And I share that because, again, if you tell a story and if they could have said, well, I helped someone just like you achieve this exact same goal that we're looking at, that I'm bringing you today, then it's like, okay, that validates for me. Okay, you've done this for someone like my client. Therefore, I can trust you to do it for my client. And when I'm in the interview process, it's the same thing. I want to look for ways that, and if I can't say it specifically, if I have to say, I was a camp counselor and I worked with the director of the camp to help them facilitate this, this, and this, and solve this problem with some of the other staff members. That may be the closest thing you can get to my director of the camp is the same as the CFO of your company. But it's again helping them see someone in your story that aligns with who they are, so that they can see you solving the type of problems that they're going to be asking you to solve in the workplace. And so that's a critical piece of this is kind of aligning that story and getting consistency around that and getting it ideally for your own well-being and sanity,
Mhm.
consistent story across your whole life, where you start to align your life around some central themes.
Okay,
And
if
then
there's any,
last,
yeah, there's any students on that are in my class that are on the call right now, this should sound a little familiar. That little packet I made where it says have one story to tell. This is from Josh and I's first call together. I took some notes from our first call. This is stuff that he has said before. So please continue. This is really good stuff.
oh, that's great. Thanks. And so once we have our story, then it's, I think the last piece I'd like to spend maybe the last 10 minutes here on and unpacking and talking through and then field any questions you have is really a meeting. And so I've got my story. I've thought about my broader brand. I've gone and cleaned up the things I said on a Saturday night when I had one too many on X or wherever I posted it. It's like, yeah, that needs to go away. Don't need to say that. Needs to disappear from the Ethernet. Um, so take care of that first, and then start to think through your personal story of what problems you solve for whom when it comes to an interview, and then ask myself, does my resume, my broader story, align around kind of a central purpose and theme that shows some consistency in my life and alignment in my life, and not just kind of a willy-nilly, I'm all over the place approach. And then lastly, when I go into a meeting, I need to go in prepared because I want my story to resonate with the person I'm meeting with. And so, how do we prepare for a story? Well, I think, or how do I prepare for a meeting? And regardless of whether you're going to a sales meeting, an interview meeting, an internal leadership meeting, there's four things that I want you to think about in all circumstances and four elements. And it's first of all, why am I going? You'd think that that would be self-evident, but it's
Hmm.
shocking to me how many times people show up for meetings and don't even know why they're there. So
Yep.
first and foremost, need to know why I'm going. Otherwise, it's really hard to do the next three steps. And then the next step is I want to think about stories that I want to tell. So I know, so let's say I'm going and flying up to Columbus and meeting with a consumer and retail company because there's like 50 of them based in Columbus, Ohio. And I'm going to be meeting with someone in HR. I know they sell something in this specific area. I'm going in to talk to them about a marketing opportunity. And so I'm tailoring my story now. I know what stories I want to tell. It's something about consumer and retail. It's something about the Midwest. It's something about how I've helped someone in a marketing role in my internship solve this problem, and how my previous selling at a lemonade stand, was part of my growing up, and how I solved that problem, and kind of have a consumer and retail mindset. So it's having my stories aligned so that I'm prepared for that. And then once I get my stories put together, then I ask myself, okay, what questions do I actually want to ask so my stories are on point? And so what that means is, once I know what stories I want to tell, then it helps me think through what story I should ask the interviewer. Because while interviewers will ask you questions, a lot of times they'll ask you, and I'm sure you've heard this already, but very often they'll ask you, "Would you have any questions for us?" And if I'm prepared with stories, it's really easy for me to prepare my questions, because my questions cue up my stories. So if I ask a question about, well, how have young executives in the past, or how are you viewing this issue with young executives supporting your CMO? Or how are you doing? And then what happens is, depending on how they answer that question, you now have a story to tell about how you solved that exact problem. Because you can say, oh, that's really helpful, or that's interesting. I had a similar experience with the CMO that I interned for last summer, in Orlando. I helped them solve this problem, this problem, this problem, this way. And so then my stories, it's not me just pitching a story, but it's me actually solving a problem. It's asking a question where they bring a problem to light, or an approach to light of the way they want to handle things differently or have handled things in the past, and allows me an opportunity to tell a story that fits into that question. Now, I don't know what stories I want to tell, or I don't know what questions I want to ask until I know what stories I want to tell. But it also
Okay.
gives me another thing, because what happens is let's say I get in a meeting and I ask these questions and my stories are no longer on point. Well, then I know I need to switch stories, because that's not what I had prepared, is not what they are interested in. And that's important as well, because I want to make sure I'm connecting with the interviewer. And if the stories I had prepared aren't the stories they want to hear, it's good to know that, rather than me just telling stories randomly, which is why the questions become so important. So I think through what stories I want to tell, I prepare my questions. And then the third thing I do in preparation for a meeting is I think through my follow-up. I always pre-think through follow-up, and you want to control follow-up. The natural response from an interviewer, or in a sales environment, or even with an internal colleague, is they'll say, great, I'll get back to you. And my response to that is always, you must control the follow-up. And if the follow-up, and so worst case scenario, if I'm going into a meeting, I'm thinking of something I can send to them follow-up wise, a backstop date when I'm going to reach out to them. So it may be, if I'm going into an interview, I may be in the sense of something comes up in the meeting, and it's like, you know what, you asked me about this and this. I have two articles I'll send you that I've written myself, or a blog post that's on this specific topic that you just referenced. I'll be happy to send that to you. And I know this is a busy time of year for you, so if I haven't heard back from you, by mid-May, I'll circle back with you. So you give yourself two backstops. One, and that's stuff I pre-think. That's a worst case scenario where they don't ask me for follow-up information. I've come up with a couple things I know I want to send them. I want to send them a blog post, or an article I wrote, or you know, a, a paper that I wrote that was on point with one of the things that you think is relevant to them. So I've got a follow-up item to keep the conversation alive. But in addition, I want to set a backstop, because the worst thing in the world is to be sitting around waiting for a phone call or an email
Yeah.
with no timeline. When they just say, hey, I'll get back to you, it's like, when? Tomorrow? Next month? It's so stressful. I think it's just stressful in a business development environment. It's extremely stressful in the job market. And so set a backstop in, and it's not too pushy. It shows initiative, um, and put yourself in a position to make sure that you keep the conversation alive. But ideally, you have something to follow up with. Where best case scenario is they ask you for more information, so you actually have a baked in follow up. Now, when I do the follow up, the next piece of that is, and this is really important, because typically when we send a follow-up email, and you always send a follow-up email, whether it's with your generic response, kind of, these are the things I pre-thought, they didn't ask for anything else, I'm going to send them this article and an affirmation. But the last piece that's critically important is, when I send that follow-up email, I need to draft the email and then push back from it and ask myself, how much is about me and how much is about them? Because even an interviewer, you need to write probably the whole first half of the email about everything they said. so that they realize, okay, he was engaged. He was listening to me. She was listening to me. They were engaged in what our goals there. And if I ask good questions, I ask questions like, well, what are your hiring? What's your growth projections in the next year? Where are you looking to hire? Or what roles? What geographic areas? Where do you see the opportunities inside your firm for progression? And re-articulate that so they know you're listening. And two, there's actually plenty of data out there to support the fact that the more you get people to talk about themselves, the smarter they think you are. And
Hmm.
so if I recap all the things they said about themselves and the company, they're like, oh, that's right. He or she did actually ask me a lot of questions. They are really smart, and so it just reminds them that it was a conversation and not a one-sided presentation. And then when I put in my follow-up points, you can reference things back and say, based on your growth strategy, we had discussed one of the blogs I wrote. Here's a link to that blog that kind of aligns with the growth strategy that you were, discussing. And based on this, your geographic inputs, upon further research, I think this area and this area, if there's options, these two cities would be areas that I'd be excited about, although any opportunity to work for you would be great. And then, so basically, all my follow-up bullet points reflect back to something in that opening paragraph that was all about them.
Hmm.
And so it reminds them that two things. One, I was listening to them, but two, all my follow-up items are things they actually asked for, or it's solving a problem for something they talked about. And so there's a reason I'm sending that follow-up information, and it's on point with something that they had actually shared with me. So again, it goes back to I'm solving a problem, just like we talked about in the story. What problems I solve for whom? It's another opportunity to remind them these are the problems you articulated in our meeting, or these are opportunities you articulated in our interview, and here are the ways that I can be a part of the solution for that. And so that allows you to kind of keep the conversation alive. It memorializes the meeting. It's so much better than, hey, thanks for the interview. Here's all the stuff I said I'd send you, and then like a paragraph about me. It's really, you need to think in terms of, and this is where you have to pay attention in an interview, right? It's not a one-sided, and this is why you ask questions and get to know this person, because you want to follow up really effectively. If you want this to be sticky, pull them into the conversation, even in the follow-up. And the best way to do that is to make sure your introductory paragraph is about them. And
Okay.
they feel like, okay, this interviewee listened. They actually listened in the interview. They just weren't spewing their rote, prepared remarks. And so I think that the value of that, the connectivity about that, and the ability to stand out, and you become memorable. Because if they did 16 30-minute interviews that day, and everybody else did one line about and then a bunch of follow-up information, and you wrote a whole paragraph about the meeting, and then your follow-up information, you're going to look wildly different than anybody else and far more memorable than anybody else. Even if your interview wasn't that memorable, it's amazing how a well-crafted follow-up email can salvage maybe not such a memorable meeting, because you memorialize in their mind in writing, and that's the piece that they have and permanently have of what the meeting was like and what the next steps are and what the follow-up is, and what you kind of emphasized in the meeting and what they emphasized in the meeting. And so it just provides an opportunity to memorialize it in a way in writing that allows you to kind of, post-mortem, so to speak, go in and clean up the meeting and frame it back to them in a way that is to your benefit long term.
Now, Josh, is that follow-up email now? Because I always tell them to send a quick thank you email by the end of the day. Is that follow-up email that, or is that at the follow-up like a week or 2 weeks down the line, like you said, that's the circle back email? Is
Yeah.
that's not the thank you email at the end of the day, right?
Well, to me, it's 24 hours. But yeah, end of the day, 24 hours. Yes, this thank you email and follow up is within 24 hours. Because again,
This is the one you're talking about.
yeah, remember, you want to strike while the iron's hot, and you just
Okay.
met with them, but also, again, they may have had, if they're interviewing, they've probably interviewed minimum 4 or 5 people that day. So how do I stand out 24 hours later from that group? Wow, it's still fresh in
Interesting.
their mind. And so yes, this and now then the follow up to that follow up email, because in that email I will say, if I haven't heard back from you by such and such a date, in my thank you email, thank you and follow up email, I'll put at the end, if I haven't heard back from you by May 15th, I'll circle back with you. I know this is a busy time of year with you because you have kids that are wrapping up school, and I want to be sensitive to that. So if I haven't heard back, I'll reach back to you. So you're listening for that reason to allow you to put in a backstop date where you're going to circle back with them if you haven't heard from them. But yes, the follow up, the thank you email, this is just a more robust version of probably the 24-hour rule of you must get them that thank you email in short order. Because you're doing a little more information, it may be 24 hours before you have time to think it through and get it well crafted. But yes,
Okay.
that is because again, you want to capture it before you become muddied by all the other interviews and they start to
Yeah.
mix you up with other people and it's like, they, again, they all did their chat GPT resumes, so they all looked and sound the same to me. It's just,
Right.
so how do I differentiate that? And the best way to differentiate is to put together that email within that 24-hour window and make sure that it reframes the story, memorializes it effectively. And then, and candidly, every correspondence from that point going forward, you stay on that same email string because they can always scroll back and you can scroll back and see the interaction.
Hmm.
And there's always that reminder of for them, it's like, oh, that's right, this is a different conversation. This isn't this the standard cookie cutter approach that I've been getting from other interviewees.
Very nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I've always said just this that, before the end of the day, before the day ends, make sure you just send a quick thank you and then you do your follow-up, whatever it is. Because I always ask them to ask the interviewer, when are you going to make a decision, listen, and then make sure you do your follow-up then as well. So it's just a much more robust thank you email.
Yes, yes. Because and then like you said, when they're going to make their decision, but always put a backstop in there where you control the follow-up. Because I think the big thing is even if they say this stuff happens inside of corporate entities where they're like, yeah, we're going to make a decision in the next 2 weeks. And then because of some type of quarterly report or some supply chain issue or a sickness in someone's family and the executive group suddenly gets pushed back a month and you don't know.
Right.
And they're not going to, in most cases, they're not going to just send you an email. Hey, by the way, this happened. We're kicking this down the road a couple of weeks. So you're left in the dark thinking, okay, did they offer it to someone else? But if I put in a backstop and say, great, I know it's a busy time of year, like I said, with kids wrapping up school or whatever you sense their circumstances are, and then you own the back. If I haven't heard from them by the end of that period and they said that they would make a decision, then I have the right to follow up because I said I would. So it
Right.
doesn't seem like I'm making this random outreach with no context, which is where it's really, it's like, should I reach out to them? Should I not reach out to them? Just tell them you're going to reach out if you haven't heard back in 3 weeks. And then you
Awesome.
then you kind of own it and it doesn't feel awkward.
Yeah, yeah, because I think our students say they'd be like, "Oh no, it's too pushy," or they said they'd get back to me, and I say, "No, no, no." Like you said, like they're busy, things happen, and you have to show initiative because everybody else is doing that same thing, going, "Hey, I did my piece, I did the interview. They said they get back to me." Like, no, you have to stand out because you're competing. You're in
Yep.
a competition, so you have to be the ones to. And I like one of my employers always says, make yourself the obvious choice, and this is one of those ways to do that. Students on the call, do you have any questions? I mean, I put that in the chat pod. I know they like to just listen, but this is a great time to ask questions. Or you can always send them to me. I'd be more than happy to reach out to Josh on your behalf if you do have any questions. But is there any last words of wisdom or anything else you want to say? We are kind of coming up on time here, Josh. There's just so much to unpack here. And I've just taken some great notes that I can incorporate in my lessons when I teach this in the fall.
No, I'm excited for you all. I think you're moving into an exciting time. Um, with a lot of changes in the marketplace provides a lot of opportunity. And
Yeah.
so just tell a good story, tell a great story, tell a true story, and then have fun with it. You're in an exciting phase of your life. I know it's scary, but it's an exciting phase.
Okay. We have one quick question about cover letters. Do you are those valuable still? Are those something that I mean, what if they don't ask for cover letters? Should you always send one regardless, or what do you feel about those?
Well, my take on a cover letter is if it's just a generic cover letter, it's just taking up space. If it's telling a story, again, if there's a story as to why I'm making this application because my great grandfather worked here and blah blah, if there's a story or if there's an internal relationship that gives context to the cover letter, then yes. If it's a generic cover letter, it's just taking up space. And so again, it goes back to is it a story or is it a generic cover letter?
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Aylin. All right. Well, Josh, again, thank you so much. Valuable information. This is recorded, so we're going to post this for anybody who missed it. Students, if you are on your computer, please click or scan the QR code. If you've logged on your phone, I put the link in the chat pod so you can click on that to make sure you get your attendance captured. Josh, again, thank you so much. If you have any questions that I can reach out to Josh on your behalf, I will be happy to do that for you guys. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And thanks again, Josh. Everybody, have a great day. Enjoy the
Thank
rest
you
of your
all.
Wednesday. Thank
Bye
you so
now.
much. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.